So my talk is RSpec for practical Rubyist. And welcome to RubyConf Taiwan for 2015. And Ruby Taiwan community, we made a little handbook for you to know the things you need to know about Taipei. You can check out this repository. It's inspired from Singapore. And my name is Juanito Fatas, and this is my GitHub. You can find my open source project. And I have an open source project which collect idioms of Ruby and benchmarks to write faster Ruby code. And I work at Jolly Good Code. I'm the employee #1. Actually, I'm the only one. And recently, we built a service to help you to do automate bundle update. So if you have tests, then you can use this service to keep your application up to date. The result will look like this. And I'm also maintain the Ruby language website for the Chinese part of it. And I'm also the translator of Rails Guide, Rails Girl Guide. So I think everyone should join open source. No matter you are doing documentation or code, it's important to do the open source. So if you have any questions, you can tweet at me with the hashtag, of course. And yesterday, I went to pick up the Aaron Patterson. He's very famous for thought leader. And his name is Dr. Tenderlove, if you don't know. So Aaron bring me the latest new iPhone, the 6S Plus. He just bring me this new iPhone. So I'm going to show a demo of 4K live photos from the iPhone 6S Plus. So the live photo is when you take a photo, you will see 2 seconds after you take the photo. So it will look like this. So it will look like this. The GIF doesn't work. So normally this will be a GIF and with typing. So Apple just reinvent the GIF. Yeah. Okay. So this is the demo of live photo. And emoji is awesome. Everyone should use emoji in your presentation. So 95% of the time I prepare this talk is tweaking fonts and thinking about which emoji should I use. And first of all, today has been a tough day. We get up so early, we run to the venue. So you will probably sleep soon unless you plug into a power outlet. So here is some mathematics to refresh your mind, to wake you up. So my first talk ever was back to Red.Dot RubyConf. It was 5 minutes. And this time is my second talk, is 15 minutes long. So let's use some mathematics. So let's psi equal to 5 and omega equal to 50. And when I divide omega by 5, will be 50 divided by 5, which is 10. So therefore, I'm now a 10 times speaker. End of proof. And so math is great. If you see any typos on my slide, you can just tweet at me. So the talk title origin was from a book that Richard Feynman, his early days, he was reading about a book. It's called Mathematics for the Practical Man. This book was written in 1918 from the Harvard University. So Richard Feynman read this book and inspired him to do the science. So I want to do this talk to inspire you to write tests. Yes. So why this test? Because Rubyist in Taiwan are courageous. So we are brave men. We always test the code on production. This guy is the guy I met yesterday in the Taipei metro. He wears this T-shirt. It is like, wow, he wears this T-shirt. And I want to raise the awareness of testing in Taiwan. And so let's go into the journey into Rails testing. So this is an introductory talk. And I will not talk about theory or TDD because reasons. And this is a how-to talk, but not a what and why. And it is a tutorial type. So to give you just enough testing background, so if you have a good test in your application, you can use the test as the live documentation to check the correctness of your code and give you confidence to go home and improve the quality of your application and save repeated labor. And also, tests can help you to drive your implementation. And actually, people are saying that when I write tests, I feel like I spend twice time to implement a feature, but actually you are buying time for the future. Because later on, when you fix the bug, it will be faster with tests to fix it. And you can find regressions, and refactoring will be never easier than before. And test is also a perfect form of bug report, and automation is a win. But testing has a lot of theories, so don't go into the rabbit hole. Just get things tested is the important thing. So what is RSpec? RSpec is a behavior-driven development for Ruby and making TDD productive and fun. And the website is here. You can find the documentations everywhere in this website. And there's another testing framework in Rails community. It's called Minitest. And there will always be a fight to choose one with the other. And but I'm not going to talk about which one is better than the other because it is out of scope. And a professional developer should be able to work in either one of these libraries because they essentially do the same thing, test your code. This quote is from Dr. Tenderlove. So unit test. The unit test looks like this. So you have you inherit from a class, test class, and you just write your test inside the class. So test case are test class, and tests are just methods inside the class. So RSpec test will look like this. It reads more like English language, so it is like a specification, more like specification. So in RSpec, the test cases are described, and tests are just it block. Okay, so in the old days, there is a physicist. It's called Archimedes. He said that, give me a place to stand on, and I will move the earth. So today, I say, give me RSpec. I can test everything in Rails. So let's do a gentle introduction to RSpec. RSpec actually is a meta Ruby gen. When you install RSpec, it will install these 3 gens for you. And you just type RSpec to run your test. And the result will be shown by the .fe star s, means pass, failure, error, pending, and skip. So when you run the spec, it will look like this, all green. And when you pass a special command line option, it can look like very like the documentation. So it is pretty handy to have this kind of documentation when you run the test to understand your application well. And so if you want to start an RSpec project, you just run this script in the folder, and you will generate two files. The first file is .rspec. This file is for config the command line option for the RSpec command. And the second one is spechelper.rb, which you put all RSpec configs in this file. Okay, let's learn some RSpec magic spells. And there is a quote say that computer science is a terrible name for this business. First of all, it is not a science. It might be engineering or it might be art, but we will actually see that computer so-called science actually has a lot in common with magic, say by the President Howard Emerson. So programming is actually a lot like magics, so we should learn some magics in RSpec. So here are four magics. The first one is describe a series of tests. And it is a test. Expect an actual object to match something. So with these four, we can describe a behavior of our application and write tests for it. So you will describe how method works and describe a group of test examples or describe a series of behavior. So when you want to test a model like user model, you just use describe user, then in the block you put test in it. And RSpec 4 provide a non-monkey patch mode to not do the bad things. So you just add this config, then it will stop monkey patch your code. And describe can be nested. So when we describe a model, a user model, and it follows by a block. When I first starting to write RSpec test, I always forget to write this do because it is a DSL, and I always forget to put the do, so you will get this error very easy when you start to write RSpec. So it is important to know that it is followed by a block. And we normally describe the class method we want to test or the instance method we want to test. But in Ruby, we have if-else. In our application, we have different scenarios. So this is when the context comes in to help us. So context is to separate the scenarios of your code, and it often starts with English like when and with. And inside describe and context, we can put test example. It is just it. So you put it in the describe and the context block, then you can write some test. And RSpec is really handy when you have a test like this. So when you run this test, it will say that Steve Jobs with stylus, yes. So it will print your test with the description you wrote. So often we just write each sentence in the hierarchy of our test to make it look like documentation. And it has two fonts. The first font is with the curly braces block. And when you have multi-line tests, you use a string and block. And there is also two aliases, which alias to it is example and specify. But I say that you should avoid to use these two unless your team already use it, or unless you have a good reason to use it. And often we need to do something before the test run. So we use before and the form of before in multi-line. Also, you may want to do things after the test run. And there are also two kinds of after you can do. And inside of it, it is when the expectations and matches come in to help us to write tests. So the expect is expect actual object to equal something we expected. So a test like this will be expect 1 plus 1 to equal 2, and it reads a lot like English. So this expect statement is from the gem RSpec expectations, and this right-hand side is the matcher. So to understand how expectation and matches work, let's go through some code. So let's prove that 1 plus 1 is 2. And in a book called Principia Mathematica, they use 162 pages to prove 1 plus 1 is 2. So let's try in RSpec. So I read the RSpec source code. This it block is actually an instance of expect example class. And so if we write the self explicitly, we can see that example class has two methods, two class methods. One is the expect, and another one is equal. And this expect method returns an instance of expectation target, and which to keep it, you can see in the slide, I use a shorthand for ET. So when you do the 1 plus 1, you just pass in the 2 to the expect and wrap it in an expectation target class. And so you pass in the actual value, which is 2, and you wrap in the class. And in the class, we just store the value for later use. So the right part is example class method equal. And this is a matcher, so we use a matcher to instantiate the instance. And in the initialize, we just store the value. It's very easy. And this is an expectation target instance, and it has two methods. And so the 2 will expect a matcher argument, because the right side is a matcher object. So you just pass in a matcher, and there is a class, it's called positive class, and it has a method called handle matcher. And when in the handle matcher, you just call the matches method on the matcher to compare these two values. So in the matches method, it is really simple just to compare if these two values are equal to each other. So every matcher in RSpec, they will implement a matches method, which to do the actual match. So voila, Oswald, you made it. And RSpec has another matcher, it's called B matcher. So you can expect some booleans to be true or false, true C value. And the whole RSpec provide a rich API to match the thing you want. The most important one are race error matcher, which often we can use when we are doing Rails. We can test that our post is raise some error with a message or the change matcher. We can use the change matcher to see if the request change our user, if we create a user successfully. And also RSpec has a shorthand of RSpec predicate. So when you do a user.admin question mark to be true, it can be right, like expect user to be admin to read more like English. So most of the time, when you read in English, there will be a matcher for it. So, but I would say you stick with the equal as a starting point to keep it simple and stupid. So the RSpec building matcher, actually you can transform anything to equal. So you just use equal, don't use the building matcher. But when you get used to it, you can use the building matcher because the building matcher have better error messages. But you need to learn and remember it. Also, let's take a look at another RSpec construct. It is called let. So let is a lazily evaluated block to share object between tests. So when you use let like this, in the it block, you will have full available to use because they are in the same scope. This syntax also looks like the scheme programming language. So when you write let, you will feel like you are writing in scheme. So, and let has is lazily evaluate. So when you put the sleep in the let and you run the test, and it will not slow you down. But when you call a full inside of your block, it will actually sleep for 42 seconds. And there is another variant of let, which is let with exclamation mark. It will evaluate the variable directly when Ruby passes the file. And but the people who write tests, sometimes they use instance variable, but I prefer let because when you have a typo in the let variable, it will catch the typo and tell you what is the typo. And next thing is to talk about RSpec marks. So to mark is like to be a mockingbird. We in the Rails we are dealing with objects, and each object is collaborators of each other. And sometimes it costs a lot to set up the collaborator object. And also, maybe you need to fake the implementation when you are doing test-driven development. And, or you can use mark to move fast and break things to experiment your code. But when you move fast and break things, make sure you drive slow, but stay safe. Okay, let's talk about double. What is double? A double is like the double for the actions. So it is a fake person to replace the real person in certain movie scenes. So it's like a fake object for the real object. And RSpec provide a method called double to create a fake object for the real one. And you can fake the message and the return value for the object. And you use allow to make an object to return the value you want. So we just create a double user, and we allow user to receive admin and return true. So when you call user.admin, it will return true. And the button is the shorthand of the above form. Yeah. So when you call user admin, it will return true. And you can also use it when you instantiate the fake object. Okay, let's talk about stop and mark. So stop and mark. The first one is stop. Stop will actually not verify if you call a method you stop or not, while mark will verify the message when you call it. If they find you didn't call the method you mark, it will raise an error to tell you. So the mark will verify, and the stop will not verify if you really call a message. Okay, so the stop is, so you can write a test with stop like this. So you allow a user to receive new, and when you call new, you can check that the user have received the new message. And in here, there is a thing I want to talk about is the strategy spaces. I often use these spaces because I want to separate the phase of testing with spaces. So the setup, exercise, verify, tear down is often known as the phase of testing. So before we test, we set up everything we need and exercise the real work, verify our expectations, and tear down to make our test back to the original state. So for example, when we implement a user password encryption, and you first set up a user object, you just create a new user and pass in a password. And this password is actually my real password. Please don't use my password. And when the exercise part, you just save the password to see that if the password is encrypted. And the next stage is tail down, but RSpec already handled this for us. So to put together, someone may write a test like this. They use before block to do the setup and do the exercise in the it and verify in the end. But when you use a methodology like strategy space, you don't need a before block. You just use blank line to separate your phases of testing. Okay, next we are going to talk about spy. So spy, the name spy is like, James Bond, the 007. It can do anything. So the James Bond can respond to any messages. So when you create a spy in RSpec, you just call spy, and it can respond to every message. So spy is like the null object of double. So you just pass whatever method, and you will respond to your message. So, and spy, we can also verify if the method has been called or not. It is just like the stop, but it responds to every message. So RSpec 2 and 3, the stop and mark syntax change a lot, so it is super confusing. But you can just try it out and explore the difference on your own. So with this bit of background, and you can write so many tests with just this simple stuff that describe it, expect. With this, you can write a lot of tests. So let's talk about testing in Rails with RSpec. When you install the gen, you just put this in your gen file and bundle and call a generator to install the RSpec Rails gen. And it has an additional config file. It's called Rails helper. And this Rails helper, we put configs about Rails. We put everything related to Rails in this file. But often we try not to load Rails helper whenever possible, because this makes our tests a lot faster. So next time you should try to test your code without loading Rails, if you can. And in RSpec, there are many types of spec, and it is inferred which type of test you are testing by the metadata you see after the user. So this type model is the metadata of the described block, and RSpec will infer the type of text automatically. So metadata is like this. When RSpec sees this, it knows that you are writing a test for model. And according to different type of tests, RSpec will mix in different functionality automatically in your block. So you can also use some other metadata to only run a single spec or other things you can do with metadata. So Rails and testing. So Rails has a test environment baked in, and it has a config file in test.rb, and it provides a reg task to run your pending migration and review your test schema. And Rails also provide these classes to help you do better testing. So you should read these API documents on the Ruby Rails API. But when we test stuff, we need to create fixture. And to create a fixture, the Rails way, the building way is to create fixture YAMLs. And the usage is like this, but when I learn Rails, everyone is using factory Go, so I don't know how to use fixture. So if you want to use fixture, you just define a factory, and you write the value you want for given attribute. And when you call these attributes for method, you will return the hash of the attributes you define in the factory. So in the spec, when you want to create a fake user, you just say factory Go create user or build user. The create user is like a user.create. It will really save your user object into the database. And the factory.build is like user.new. So to install a factory Go, you just put this in your gem file and bundle, and create a new directory. And in these directories, you put files in this convention. But we don't want to write the factory Go prefix every single time. So you just put this config, then you can write create user instead of factory.create user in your test. And often we only need minimum stuff to get a valid object, because we don't want to put more things that we don't want it. So it's good to use minimum valid object. And Rails has different types of tests. So Rails, you see we got 5 layers: the view, the route, the helper, the controller, and model. And each type of test cover different part of Rails, showing by this diagram. You can see, and also there are terms like top-down testing, or bottom-up testing, or inside-out testing, and outside-in testing can all be understood by this picture. And so the user lives on the top right, and our code is on the left bottom. So, and the coverage, you see the feature spec, the coverage is the most broadest coverage. But when you have big coverage, it means slower the test. So the coverage, slow coverage is fast. But there are so many types of tests. Where should I start it? So I would say you first start with the feature spec, because the coverage is the biggest. And when you write a feature spec, you just put the spec in this location and require the helper. And the goal to write feature spec is to automate the manual repeat process. Like we do in browser, we check, we refresh. We want to automate this behavior. So we need to test like how the user will use it and use real database records because we want to see if it really works. And try not to mark or stop objects. But external service, you can mark it. And to write the feature spec, you follow the happy path. The happy path is the path without failures. Because the feature spec is very slow, we don't want to handle every case. And there is a gem called Capybara. It's an API to interact with browser. And you install it, you put in the gem file and bundle install. And require the Capybara in your Rails helper. And there is also another gem called database reminder. You can ensure your test state is clean across each test. And you install the database reminder like this and config to clean your database before test shoot. And after each test, also clear the database. And Capybara provides this for API. The spec will look like this. Actually, this for API just alias of RSpec built-in construct. And in the feature block, the Capybara API will be available in here. And Capybara has this API that you can access to the page or choose a radio button, check the checkbox, something like this. And by default, it uses rake test gem to test your application, but you cannot access to JavaScript. So if we are going to test the sign-in function of our application, we can do something like this. And it reads a lot like the English. And you can also do a test about if the username show up on your page, like this. And you can also try to click some link on the test and to see if the number of votes change. And RSpec also has many other drivers to test JavaScript. And the DSL is the same, so you can use the same DSL to test JavaScript too. So, and you use this metadata to enable the JavaScript driver. And the default driver is Selenium. Selenium is Firefox. And it needs to start the entire browser to run your test. So it is very slow. So there is another option. It's called Capybara WebKit, which is headless testing. This means they will not instantiate the browser. Also, there is a Phantom.js driver. You can use this Poltergeist driver to test your application with JavaScript. And you can specify which driver you want to use in Capybara. Okay, let's talk about controller spec. The convention of controller spec is to put the test in controllers and you describe the action. So the convention for RESTful example will look like this. You just put each action in the top level describe block. And the order should be the same as your actions in the controller because later on we will need to add more actions or debug our tests. This way it's easier to find the difference. So in the controller spec, we want to test if the response is correct or success, or we redirect to right page or the authentication. these things we care about in controller spec. And controller spec wrap on Rails test case class to provide this API for you to access, and you can use this API in your controller spec to test the thing you want, like if it render the correct template or redirect to correct place. So also we can, a technique I often use is I wrap my request in a method. So I wrap the get index in the do request method, and because they are in the same scope, so I can use it in the it block. So when you wrap the method like this, you will have the same interface to test. Okay, let's see an example of rest of our controller spec. So the skeleton is describe a controller, and you put every actions inside this skeleton. And when you do a helper method like this, then you will have a uniform interface of test. So everything will be easier if you use some abstractions. And the show will look like this, and edit, update, and destroy. So it is important to keep the spec with same shape, so you can find the difference. And in Rails 4, when you want to do a HTTP action, you just pass in 3 hashes. And these 3 hashes are parent, session, and flash. But DHH is not happy about this API, so he suggests that we migrate to keyword argument in Rails 5. So another thing I want to say is that when you do controller testing, you wrap everything in object and only test them if the message has been correctly invoked in the controller. So when you do a create test, you only need to make sure that the mailer message have been received, then it is okay, or you receive the charge message of payment. Okay, next thing is the model spec. The model spec is to test how you are trying in the Rails console. So when you start Rails, you often try stuff in the Rails console. So you can write this stuff you try in Rails console in the model spec, and you put in this location, and often we test the association, validation, and class method, instance method. And there's another gen called Shuda. You can write one-liner spec for associations and validations. And in Rails, it provides a test case class, which you can use to test model spec. And if you want to test the association with Shuda, it will look like this. And RSpec has an implicit subject, and it is actually there, but you can see it. Also, RSpec provides another API. It's called expected, which is equal to the expect subject. So RSpec always try to make your test read like English. And validation, you can also test validation in one line like this. So you don't have to know what Rails give the error message like. So you don't have to know can be blank or something like that when you use Shuda method. And if you test a trending scope like this, then you just use the equal method to see if the objects are correctly pulled out from database. And helper spec is just to test the view helper as you will expect it to see in the view. And helper spec you just require the Rails helper and put in this location. And to test the helper, when you describe a helper, actually it will become a class by default. And in the it block, actually you can access the helper by this class. So in the helper, you can just use the method in your events helper to test if the view helper act as you expected in the view. And RSpec is wrapped on these APIs on Rails. And the convention is to put this spec here. And this, there is a gem called email spec. And it is not in the RSpec code, so we need to install it and config to include the API for us to use in the spec. And in the mailer spec, we want to test if the mail sent correctly and the content. So the mailer spec will look something like this. So this is another example. Okay. And job spec, we want to test our background job. And in background job, we only need to check if the method invoked correctly, because when you wrap everything in object, you already test the object. You only need to check if the method invoked correctly. And Rails provide these two classes to help us to test our background job. And the background job, you put the spec in here and to check if it sent the right message. And so the logic should be already tested in your class. And view spec and the request spec, because I use feature spec a lot, this is like the overlap. So I don't normally do view spec and the request spec. So there is another type of test is plain old Ruby object. So it is similar to model spec, but you just don't need to load Rails. And so the goal to test the real world interaction is to, we want to run our spec with our network. And why is that? Because maybe there will be an API limit, or maybe the service is not exist. And it is free if you want to put the spec everywhere. So stop marking. It is quite. We use this webmark gem to make fake request. And you install a gem like this and config and stop the HTTP request. And you can check if the request has been made or not. And you can use a gem like VCR to record your response, or you can put in file to record your response. When you not stop, the test will fail. Because I'm running out of time, you can check out this GitHub to find out more about stop. And when I do debug in Rails, oftentimes I stop Spring or use Pry or by bug everywhere, or just do push pp raise. So to close this presentation, I didn't cover this topic. And if you're working on legacy code, you can make the spec pending or skip, and you can write a feature spec, or you just do new things with spec. So you don't test private method, you wrap everything in object, and you can use shootout to simplify when you get tired. Use tools. So you don't go for 100% coverage, and we write more tests. And when things will go wrong, it will go wrong. That's why we write tests. Tests are cold, it will become stinky, so break up with it when the time comes. And there are a million ways to test things. There is no tomorrow, right? Test now. A test is better than no test. And when you have no time, you just write these 3 tests and do code review, have a team style guide. So the takeaway is always be testing, ABT, ABT, ABT. Resource, you can check out this talk to learn more about testing, or these 2 books. I also write a book. If you promise me you will write the test is free. So if you want to get started with testing, you talk to me. Okay, thank you for listening. It's tea time. Thank you.